Welcome to another episode of Pop Occulture with Lilith Dorsey and Jason Winslade, where we explore the crossroads of occultism, popular culture, and media. I'm Jason Winslade, media studies and performance studies and religion scholar.
I am Lilith Dorsey, author and filmmaker and voodoo queen. I'm gonna add that in there because that's important. And for the purposes of this discussion, I also have my master's in cinema and television studies from NYU. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different things in this Pop Occulture show. And each program, we're going to discuss some of the themes and issues surrounding the occult in the various popular media. So this week, we're going to look at something that I have loved since I could, drag my little teeny, butt in front of the television too close. That's why I wear glasses and watch over and over and over again, The Wizard of Oz.
I came dressed appropriately.
I did. I went all the way to the dollar store and I could not find any witchy things except a cinnamon broom. So that shows my Oshun character. But, we're low on witches here in New Orleans, I think,
Yeah, you can't find any of that stuff in New Orleans.
I was like, that's Cliff, man. Look, wait a minute. I'm going to scream.
Wow. I can feel the existential dread from through the screen.
It's Shrek. Okay, so we're going to talk about The Wizard of Oz. And I think, there's some things that we're going to want to talk about that harken back to the original Frank L. Baum book. And there's some things that we're going to talk about that relate to the classic film of the 30s. And then I even want to talk a little bit about The Wiz, because, when you make something as classic as The Wizard of Oz with a whole black overcoat to it and put, Diana Ross and Richard Pryor and Michael Jackson in it, like you just can't not talk about it. So,
well, I think it was you that mentioned at one point that Wizard of Oz is like it's an text, that there's so many things that have emerged from it, that it's such an archetype that you could look at an episode of a television show and say, oh, that's a Wizard of Oz allegory, and this character is the Scarecrow, and this character is the Tin Man, and all that stuff. And of course, you have the direct, not what's the word, not spin-offs, but direct homages like Wicked and Once Upon a Time, which I saw every single one of those episodes. But there's actually some really cool stuff in there in the way that it reframes the story and all that. That's all stuff we can get into.
No, I think that we have something, you're right, it is an text. It's got that sort of classic fairy tale element to it going on, definitely. And I think some of the original things that I found really fascinating about it was that Baum really wanted to put magic into the text. We have witches. We were talking about this earlier. We have in the film, there's only, we get the Witch of the East is dead already when we start, and we've got Glinda from the north and the Wicked Witch in the west. And so instead of having the four witches, which originally represented the four directions, which I find really fascinating, just as a magical person, and that's already in there in the text. And we get rid of that. There's even early mention in the book about how the shoes were a spell in and of themselves. And I just find that idea fascinating, that again has a real true magical element to it, that you can have an enchanted object, that you could have a bewitched object. And
they're silver, not ruby.
What?
They're silver, not ruby.
I know, they're silver, not ruby. Yes, definitely, which I suppose was a political commentary that he was making, because it had to do with he wanted the US to go back to being backed on silver as opposed to gold. So this was supposed to, this was part of, there's been some scholarship about how it really was a progressive text and a political commentary about sort of valorizing the Midwest and the simple life and farming and agriculture and all of those things. And yes, obviously the thing about silver has been brought up as opposed to this, it was really sort of anti-capitalism, anti-big money, and you get that in the message, I think.
And one of the things I find so fascinating about some of the differences with the book, and some of this I when my daughter was younger, I got her the entire series that Marvel Comics put out of the Wizard of Oz adaptations. Like it actually went up until I think the 7th or 8th book, because I don't know if you know, there's like 25, 30 books that Baum wrote in the series, and then it was continued after his death by different authors, and there's like hundreds of Oz books, and they get really, really weird. But one of my favorite differences with the original text is what the Emerald City is. And in the book, if you've never read the book, and when I say you, I'm talking to our audience. I'm sure you have, but if you've never read the book, in the book, the city isn't made of emerald. What they do is that you are not allowed to enter into the city unless you wear these special goggles that they give you that are green tinted, so that when you put on the goggles, you see the city as emerald. So the whole idea of the Emerald City is an illusion. It's propaganda, and that's one of the things that I find fascinating when we look at Oz as a progressive text, is that it's already critiquing the culture that's built up around the wizard as fake. And gosh, if there's not a time where you could talk about, you know, the man behind the curtain and fake news and all that, it's now. I mean, wow.
Definitely. And I love this, you know, instead of it being rose colored glasses, you have green colored glasses. Again, this, you know, critique of, you know, and it makes me think about how, you know, when they go in the Wiz, they just sort of change colors, and the song is about, you know, you wouldn't be dead in red, you know, you got to be seen in green, you know, like this whole real visual cinematography surrounding the foregrounding of color, you know, and it's right there. I can't not mention it, the fact that it's right there at you know, at the base of the Twin Towers, which ended up being ground zero, you know. So it's just such a poignant text to go back and look at again, that this is really was the symbol of, you know, everything in the US, and you're saying it still holds up as a great symbol today, and it holds up as a symbol throughout since he wrote it back in, what was it, 1901, I believe, you know. And I think that's funny, my daughter read the books too, and she was fascinated by all of them.
Right. And if you're talking about colors, like, you know, just that green thing, you know, like the, you know, green we associate, you know, as magical practitioners, we associate with earth and money. And I'm sure there was some kind of an allegory there with the goggles, that like it's about seeing wealth and money. But then also in the movie, how Margaret Hamilton is green, and I think research has shown us that that was like a technical choice. It wasn't a creative choice. It was because otherwise she would get washed out by her black outfit. So that they made her wear this green makeup that was like, wasn't it like cancerous or something like that? I don't know. There was this whole,
and it actually caught on fire. I wore my green makeup today, in honor of Margaret Hamilton. But yes, it was. And I think it's interesting, the development of the witch. You know, originally it was not supposed to be Margaret Hamilton. It was supposed to be a different actress, and it was supposed to be much sexier. And when the studio came back and said, we can't, bottom line, we can't have a sexy witch, then the actress was like, well, I'm not going to do that to my career. You know, in the 30s, obviously you've got this whole kind of vamp kind of culture thing going on. So she decided to do that instead. So I thought that was, and then they got Margaret Hamilton, which, yeah, we were going to start with this in the beginning of the episode, but one of the reasons we wanted to do The Wizard of Oz as the beginning, really, film text that we talk about here on the show is we wanted to sort of start with this image of the media crone, you know, and I think that Margaret Hamilton embodies that on every level, you know. I mean, Margaret Hamilton, the person, was a single mom, and she was a teacher, which scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Oh my gosh, like, oh my, Miss Gulch could be my teacher? No, please, no. But it had all of those, she had all of those things going for her. And in my research for the show today, I found something where it said she signed her letters Mag the Hag. So again, she was embracing this kind of haggy crone witch image that we know from way back before the movie, and you know, is really an archetype.
Yeah, that the image of Margaret Hamilton is practically universal. Everybody knows it. And what's interesting, going back to what you said about the 30s vamp thing, is that when it came to if you look at some film history, and a lot of this, and I'm probably going to be citing and stealing from Heather Green's book, Bell Book and Camera.
We love Heather Green. She's my Llewellyn editor and my dear friend.
Critical History, which is an American film and television. Yeah, that there was, this was at a time in the 30s when the MPAA were really starting to get established, and standards in film and cinema, and moral standards especially, were being set, and that there, in prior eras, there wasn't any problem with witches in terms of them being evil or satanic. It was when they got to be immoral and sexy that was the issue. So it makes sense that by that point, when Wizard of Oz was being made, that they started to crack down on that. Another point that she makes is that Heather Green makes is that there was a point in the 20s. There were a lot of witches in silent films in the teens, but in the 20s, that the figure of the witch went away for a while, because there was a much more kind of, for lack of a better term, like outwardly, feminist depiction of independent women. And in the 30s, that the idea of the strict gender role traditional woman came back. And so that the witch was only important as an allegorical figure when you had what they call like the true woman, she refers to it as. So that you have to have a witch to contrast the true woman. The witch is what you're supposed to not be, as opposed to the true woman who fits the gender roles, who plays that role in society, who gets married, or if she doesn't get married, she gets sacrificed. So that there's this interesting parallel, so that when you have that evil witch, you also have the young innocent, you have the Dorothy, you have the Snow White, and all of that. So that idea of that cronish archetype that's not just crone in terms of having knowledge and being helpful as they would have in earlier films. By that point in the 30s, she's now just evil.
Yeah, and again, this whole idea of it being ugly and unsexualized and haggy and all of these things that, who wants to be that? That sounds horrible, so.
These days it is kind of sexy, but
Well, again, traditionally, this is not something was necessarily everybody's kink. So.
Which kink?
No, I just think that I do want to say this, since we're talking about this whole thing. If we look at Glinda in contrast, we've got Billy Burke in the North. And again, some of what I was, revisiting for the show was that she was married to Ziegfeld. So she was like about as glamorous as you could be. And there's all these stories about her being the showgirl. And, I remember my grandmother telling me stories about showgirls in the 30s that was just about as elegant and divine, but still also sexualized in a way, but not in the negative way on the other side of things. But she was also retired from that life and married and had children and things like that. So you've got her almost in the story serving as this kind of mother figure, almost as Auntie Em almost does, as somebody who's like a protector of Dorothy. And one of the
mother being thrown in the film itself.
Yes, one of the things I found interesting that, I mentioned earlier how she told Dorothy in the book that the shoes were a spell. So it's in a way that somehow through this motherliness, she's lost a lot of her magic. And I think that's fascinating to me, or that her magical gifts are in the caretaking as opposed to the actual, boom, kind of, like I can throw fire bolts with my hands or something,
Right. So let's break this down. Like when we talk about, what this witch represents in the story, and in the discourse around Wizard of Oz, what comes up? she's the antagonist. She's the thing that Dorothy has to get past to get to she's the final boss that she's got to fight in order to get the boon from the wizard. It's his agenda. It's the wizard's agenda to have her killed.
Right.
So, if the wizard is progress, but also progress that's somewhat hucksterism.
Yes, and I think that there's, yeah, definitely.
Like if that's the master being served, then what purpose does it serve to get rid of the witch?
Because she represents the intellectualism. I mean, I already mentioned this thing about her being the teacher, her being the authority. You know what I mean? That we're going to get rid of these, whatever female authority exists. I mean, if we look at it at the time, again, I go back to my grandmother, she was a teacher. How many other professions were open to her, in the
Right.
30s? Not that many, So I think that this was still an area where women were afforded some sense of control as teachers, as, the ones who were taking care of the children. And you're scratching your head like a cartoon.
I hadn't even put that together. The idea that the witch is a teacher in Dorothy's reality, because I never thought of the witch as an intellectual, but with that context, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, and if you look at it, she's really defeated by accident in the end. It's not really that much anything that was done, it's not because of their skill or their intelligence or anything like that. She's defeated by accident. For me, my read of it is she's the most competent person there. You know what I mean? Not necessarily even because of the actual physical abilities that each one has, but because people don't recognize their abilities. That's the message of the film, like you have all these great things and you're not using it. The witch is the only one who's using all of her great stuff.
Right. And in all the retellings, that's a major factor too. Like, in Wicked, there's a whole thing about education in the play and the book that it was loosely based on. But yeah, the idea that she's trying to figure out all this stuff and is this kind of, I guess almost, gosh, now I'm thinking like 2016 election and like, if Hillary Clinton is the Wicked Witch of the West or whatever, like she's just flabbergasted that anybody believes this wizard who is just selling them, fake snake oil. But
well, they do. That's the sad part. I got invited to be on a podcast the other day and I looked them up. They had some videos. I won't say who they are because I don't want anybody else to watch this crap. But honestly, their most popular video was that Hillary Clinton was dead and a body double has been used for the past 5 years. So I'm like, but again, this is where I find it ironic because this is where they stick voodoo. I'm stuck with the UFOs and the, whatever, that Hillary deniers and all of these other people. And it really seemed, I don't want to go on the show as much publicity as it could give me, but it really shows me that there's a huge segment of the population that's, eating it up.
And of course that goes right into the ways that I'm sure we'll continue to go back and forth around this, but the ways that most people who approach witchcraft specifically in popular culture will talk about that trope in terms of the marginalized woman, the woman who's she knows that she's doing, but she's her power has been taken away by society, by patriarchy, by the white male wizard and all that. So it even though we grow up seeing her as evil, I think it makes sense that as people, as we as a culture got older, we started to reframe that witch character, to show that she's the one who knows what's really going on, and she's been given a bad rap and all that kind of stuff. I was thinking about how in Once Upon a Time too, the character of Zelina in Once Upon a Time is like, the green goes along with her being jealous of her sister and all that. So she's like a lot of the characters in that show it was all about, they were denied affection. So
right.
there was all these like abandonment issues, and so they're you know, they're going to take it on themselves to take back their power whatever way they can, but then eventually they see the error of their ways and find a balance. You know, the same thing with the evil witch Snow White character Regina on the show. So it makes sense that this is the foundation, this is the seed. We see this thing, we all grew up with this archetype, and so many of us women and men, you know, seeing this as okay, what's the next part of the story, because this is not satisfactory, this isn't enough. But yeah, I mean, it gets complicated. You go back to Baum, and you go back to all the things that you know, that he was doing with, you know, is the West meant to mean the frontier, the wildness,
Right.
That progress has to marginalize, to take under control. And of course, there's a whole colonialist theme there too. You know, that even though, I mean, I guess, you know, the witch is a woman of color, green, but
Yeah.
still.
Well, that's not really a color, but yes,
I'm saying, it's a stretch, but I'm saying like that's
no, but I did want to talk about this whole dichotomy that it sets up. It definitely sets up this polarity of light and dark, you know, and I think there's certainly been a lot of negative press attached to, you know, this whole dark side, dark magic kind of things since the beginning of time, you know, and this, it sets up these things. It also sets up, I'm glad you brought it back to the West again, you know, because for me, it goes with the elementals. And I started thinking about that scene with the poppies, you know, that scene where they start falling asleep in the poppy field, you know, obviously under the influence of opium, poppies, and, you know, so it's interesting to me that just, okay, so we're looking at Glinda and we're looking at the Witch of the West. And it's interesting to me how the Witch of the West sends this very kind of earthy thing, something we'd think of as, you know, North Earth, you know, poppies, you know, something that just totally is going to take them away. And then the Glinda responds with snow, which is water, something from the West. So it's like she defeats her with her own element almost, you know. It's like, reminds me of some of these superhero things where people throw the elemental stuff at each other, but you know, she throws fireballs and then she throws snow, and then she throws poppies. It's like they have command of all these earthy elements, and I just love that particular thing. Just, I mean, as a child now. What?
Dorothy does defeat her with water.
She does. She does defeat her with water. So yeah, she takes her down with her own strength. Yes, purely by accident. I'm melting.
So another thing about the sense of, you know, Baum's use of magic, and that you know, and so when we did some research on you know, he was his family, or I believe it was his mother-in-law, brought him into the Theosophical Society.
Oh wow.
So that he was a member for a while, although they've said that you know, he didn't subscribe to all of the stuff, but he was very aware of Blavatsky and very aware of probably some of those well-known theosophical narratives about the hidden masters, you know, or the you know, the gurus that were up in the Himalayas or something like that. So this idea of seats of power that you can have access to if you take the right road and all that. But I was also thinking about how Baum's connection to Chicago and the Columbian Expo in 1893 that created that whole weird thing called the White City, that was this paradise on earth until it burned down in the middle of the festival, or of the exhibition. But that was the Emerald City. That was the inspiration for the Emerald City, was the White City, where these, and what's interesting about the White City was that, you know, it was this completely, if you ever look at pictures of this, it's so elaborate, and like, you can't even believe that such a place existed, but it was all facades. That's why it burned so quickly, was that there was only like one or two real buildings, and one of them later became the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago.
Does it have a weird vibe?
It's. I think that and the Art Institute were like they're the only buildings from that time. But everything else there were buildings that stuff happened in, and people were going. So they were like real in that sense, but they went up like that when the fire happened. But yeah, if you look at there's even some film footage from that time, like just really grainy silent film, and yeah, it's phenomenal. So it's like, the Columbian Expo was meant to be this whole statement on American progress and American progressivism, and specifically around that was where the World Parliament of Religions started. So it was meant to be this ecumenical meeting of minds where of course this is known as one of the first times that America as a whole was introduced to yoga, was introduced to Hinduism and Muslim and Islam and all that stuff. Like the way that this was then introduced as, it was otherness brought in as accessible. So this is like the beginning of, cultural appropriation.
I was gonna say, yeah, look at this. It's the seed of cultural appropriation.
And this is what L. Frank Baum saw as, paradise, as Oz. And that's the foundation for all of it.
Wonderful.
And so when you think about this narrative of the witch being defeated comes out of that notion of progressivism, and what are the victims of progressivism in that sense? Like what's gonna get taken?
Right.
We're gonna take those shoes off the witch and use them ourselves, and we're gonna do better with that stuff than the evil witches who owned it. So there's a lot of like subtle things in there that can be interpreted through today's lens as a take on cultural appropriation. It's kind of blowing my mind as I think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes me think about, again, all these different permutations of it as it manifests, we're talking about, I was mentioning before Oz in the Wiz, which is, again, the World Trade Center, this whole seat of commerce and things like that, and then even if we go back and look at the, 1939, right? 38, whatever. And it, it's turned into some sort of weird, robotic beauty salon, like, this is what you get here. Like, you can even dye my eyes to match my gown. Like, what? Like, this is, if you can have anything in the world, this is what you want,
Well, that
I mean, it sounds cool AF. Well, don't get me wrong, but
it makes sense coming out of the 80s, right? That we're talking about capitalistic excess here. Like this is what.
Sure.
This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we're approaching time. Are there other things? Anything else we wanted to discuss around this before we go?
I'm trying to think. Not that I can think of. I think I said everything I wanted to say. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's so much
on, but
I mean, any of these topics that we're going to talk about every week, they're endless topics. And in fact, once we start doing more of these shows and doing them live, we're gonna put it out there to you, to our viewers, to ask us questions, to make suggestions for occult artifacts, pop culture artifacts that you want us to take a deep dive on, and take a look at some things that you're interested in.
I'm gonna dive. I'm gonna belly flop on these topics.
Well, hopefully not that, but yeah. So that's our show. I think we're going to be our next few shows, since we're close to Halloween, we're going to be doing that crone mother maiden thing, kind of backwards. So the next show we're going to talk about practical magic and witches of Eastwick, and we're going to look deeper at that sexy witch archetype, and then we're going to follow up with some teen witch stuff, the craft, Buffy, all that, and maybe a few surprises along with that. We'll see.
We hope. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks Please subscribe to all our social media. We got it together enough to be on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and so we would really love it if you follow us there. What?
We're going to Patreon soon.
We're going to Patreon soon. So follow those pages, and then you can find out what's going on and what we're doing. So thank you very much, and take care.
Till next time.
Next time.
Ha 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 ha.